Peter. So I told him you were going to buy one of those $300.
I'll have another one.
Let me just, I want to introduce a different topic to you. So I'll give you a little bit about the Sierra Club structure. There's the national organization, which is in San Francisco, because that's where the club was founded over 100 years ago. And then there are chapters. And, we're part of the Lone Prieta chapter from the 3 counties of San Mateo, Santa Clara, and San Francisco. And then the Guadalupe group, and we're down to what I represent as chair. We're putting this on, so there's about half a dozen of us for that. The other thing that is, there's also, separate from all that, a state, California state. So that's a background for the fact that if you're interested, there's going to be a fundraiser for the state operation. There's a woman named Catherine Phillips, who is basically the director of the state organization. She is really a lobbyist. So the last Sunday in July, if you're interested, before you leave, just mark it on there and I'll give you the details. It's a Sunday afternoon at my house here to talk about what's going on in the legislature. And it's a good time to actually influence and call your assembly members, senators at the state level and see what we can do about getting some of this legislation. So let me introduce to you a man who I've heard more about than I've really had an opportunity to get to know, Peter Drekmeier. Peter is the founder and I guess the leader of the Tuolumne Trust or something like that. What I find impressive, he is the former mayor of Palo Alto. And, that's quite a town to be a mayor of. So he's going to give you a presentation about the Tuolumne River, and he also was instrumental in starting the Earth Day activities here in the Bay Area. So let me introduce Peter.
Thanks a lot, Jared. Nice to see you all. Thanks so much for having me here. Some familiar faces and some new faces. So yeah, I work for the Tuolumne River Trust. I actually wasn't the founder. It was founded in 1981, and I was a high school student. But we have a kind of a long history of successes protecting the Tuolumne River. And I'd like to talk to you about some of those and a little bit about the drought and current situation. So my friend Marty is my advancer here. So the Tuolumne provides water to more than 2.5 million people in the Bay Area. So San Francisco, all of San Mateo County, Alameda County from Hayward south, and then the northern part of Santa Clara County. So not here, but Palo Alto, Mountain View, Los Altos Hills, Milpitas, Sunnyvale, parts of Santa Clara and San Jose. So it's a really important water source. For these areas, about 85% of the water comes from the Tuolumne. And here's a map of the Tuolumne. By the way, we work with a lot of kids. We have a program called That's the Tuolumne My Tap. And we teach them how to pronounce Tuolumne by reminding them Tuolumne, Tuola you. So that's a good way to remember. Even adults have a tough time with the Tuolumne. So the Tuolumne drains the northern half of Yosemite. That's where it starts. And the Hetchy Reservoir, where the water is stored, is in Yosemite. The southern part is where the Yosemite Valley is. That's drained by the Merced River. It flows down towards the bay. There's another large reservoir called Don Pedro, which is predominantly for agricultural water in Stanislaus County, and flows through Modesto. We have offices in Sonora, Modesto, and San Francisco, so we're working throughout the watershed. Then it joins, this is the confluence with the San Joaquin River. I'll show you a picture of this little area here. It's called Dos Rios, and we purchased that a few years ago, and it's being restored to wildlife habitat, so that's been an exciting project. And then the San Joaquin flows up into the delta, and of course from the north comes the Sacramento, largest estuary on the west coast, the Bay Delta. And some of the water even makes it all the way out into the Pacific Ocean. So that's the natural journey of the Tuolumne. This is the Mount Lyell Glacier in Yosemite. It's the headwaters. And next one, it feeds the Lyell Fork of the Tuolumne. And the Lyell Fork joins the Dana Fork and This is just upstream of Tuolumne Meadows. So a lot of people who are familiar with the Tuolumne know it through Tuolumne Meadows. And then we have the Grand Canyon of the Tuolumne, which is a fabulous hike, 3 or 4 day hike. And what you see in here is very common in Yosemite. It's a lot of granite. So that's why we have these, scenic vistas, steep cliffs, things like El Capitan, Half Dome, waterfalls. But also, there's just not a lot of erosion. Granite's really, really hard. So we have some of the best drinking water in the world. It doesn't have to be filtered. It's so clean. And actually, Willie Brown, you can kind of see in the background there, toyed with the idea of bottling Hetchy water back about 15 years. And this is the Hetchy Reservoir. You can actually drive out to it. You can't really drive across the dam anymore, but you can walk across. There's a tunnel. It takes you out to some wonderful waterfalls, and you can get back into the backcountry. So the dam that creates the Hetchy Reservoir is called OShaughnessy Dam. It's named after this guy, Michael O'Shaughnessy. And he was director of public works for San Francisco back during the last turn of the century. And he was tasked with identifying a good, big, reliable water supply for the city of San Francisco and some other partner cities. And they found this area of Hetchy Valley to make a lot of sense because it's a wide open valley and it narrows down here. So you can put a dam, fill it up, and have a reservoir to capture the water. Probably a lot of you know that was a very controversial issue. John Muir and the Sierra Club were very opposed to building a dam in a national park and actually convinced Congress to deny it. So that was a big victory for the Sierra Club. But then in 1906, we had the big earthquake. Buildings came crashing down, gas lines broke, the city caught on fire. And San Francisco went back to Congress, which was more sympathetic at the time. We really need a reliable water supply, make sure this never happens again. And in 1913, Congress approved the Raker Act, which allowed San Francisco to build the O'Shaughnessy Dam and create the Hetchy Reservoir. And it was completed in 1923. John Muir died shortly before that, when he saved from a broken heart. But the dam's there now, and turned Hetchy Valley into the Hetchy Reservoir. And you might remember, you could see these waterfalls, the Tomahawk Falls, and the other one, I don't remember its name, but you can see those in the historic photos. So that's what we have there now.
What's the level today?
I'll actually have a slide that will show that. So downstream of Hetchy is a beautiful reach of river, and there are a lot of rainbow trout, which are native, and brown trout, which were introduced, they're non-native. Rainbow trout are really amazing species. They can live their whole life in fresh water and reproduce and carry on that way. But they can also become anadromous, meaning that if they have a way to get to the ocean, they'll go out to the ocean, they'll live there for 2-3 years, and when it's time for them to reproduce, they have to come back in fresh water. And they come back to the very same river where they were born. They can smell the water, and often to the same stretch of the river. And they'll reproduce, and the next cycle will come about. So the benefit of going to the ocean is that there's a lot more food, and they can come back as a steelhead. So rainbow trout and steelhead are really the same species. Rainbow trout is non-anadromous, might become anadromous if it has access to the ocean. Steelhead have lived some of their life in the ocean. So, same thing, yeah. So it's interesting because steelhead in the Central Valley are now listed as threatened, but rainbow trout aren't. So there's some debates about how do we distinguish the two. And apparently you can, there's a bone in the ear that you can find out if it's anadromous or not, if it lived in the ocean. You have to kill the fish to learn that. So anyway, the rainbow trout below Hetchy, they cannot become steelhead because of that other large dam downstream Don Pedro. Next one. So fish, obviously are very, very important to the whole food web. We have river otters on the Tuolumne, wonderful creatures. Sea otters just have one pup, whatever you call it. But because life in the ocean is more perilous. But when we see a family on the Tuolumne, there might be 3 or more. Very, very playful. Bald eagles in the watershed. This one's about to catch a fish. Always live near water, whether it's the ocean or a lake or a river. Black bear, obviously an omnivore, but love fish. And the stretch of there's an 18-mile stretch below Hetchy, which is one of the best rafting areas in the country. It's class 4. There's one class 5. This is Levy Falls right here. Very, very exciting. And we usually do 2-day trips, so you have the excitement of rafting down this canyon. You don't really see many signs of civilization. Occasionally you'll see another rafting trip go by, but it's permitted, so it's limited. Don't see any roads. Might see a plane fly overhead. Fall asleep underneath the stars, listening to the sound of a river. It's just, nothing is more satisfying to the human spirit than being on the Tuolumne. Great swimming holes in the side canyons, excellent fishing if you're into fly fishing. Just a wonderful, wonderful river. And for this reason, the Tuolumne was designated a wild and scenic river in 1984, which means no new dams can be built on the main stem of the river and no development along the banks. So our organization, we were created in 1981 when there was a proposal to build more dams. And the strategy was to try to get wild and scenic status, and we were successful in '84. So that was the first major victory. So this is the Don Pedro Reservoir, and everything upstream of it, 83 miles, which we refer to as the Upper Tuolumne, is wild and scenic. And then downstream is the Lower Tuolumne, which also has some special characteristics. But I did want to mention that the rim fire in August of 2013, 97% of the fire burned in the Tuolumne River watershed. So here you see the limits of the rim fire. And Hetchy's here. The burn came down a little bit to the banks, but there wasn't a lot of vegetation there. So fortunately, we didn't get a lot of sediment coming into Hetchy. There's a little bit of ash on it, but our water supply was mostly protected. The PUC has a couple of other reservoirs up there, Cherry and Eleanor, and they suffered more of the burn, but that water is not for drinking. We can only get our drinking water from Hetchy. Excellent. So 400 square miles were burned. So that's an area 8 times the size of San Francisco. Here's the Tuolumne River Canyon. You can see a lot of burn here. Really, the most severe burn was a little bit away from the river. The river's a little bit cooler. There's more moisture there. So fortunately, it was a little bit more protected. Here's a picture of the Tuolumne before the rim fire. Really pristine water. And this was after the first big storm. So a lot of the sediment went down into the Don Pedro Reservoir. But we're seeing a lot of wildflowers coming back. I did a rafting trip in May, and a lot of new growth. It's starting to come back, and we've been really engaged in that. We actually, there was a big debate over salvage logging, and some environmental groups, including ours, acknowledge that some salvage logging probably makes sense to reduce fuel load so we wouldn't have another catastrophic fire, make sure that there are migration corridors for animals. And we worked with the timber interests to come up with a compromise. The Forest Service was proposing 600 million board feet of salvage logging. And working with the timber interests, we came up with a plan to reduce that by 2/3, down to 200 million board feet. Our interest obviously was keeping these snags that are wildlife habitat down logs, keeping biomass on site. Their interest was expediting the process because there was still enough wood to service all of the local mills. And they only had about 1.5 years to salvage the wood before it started to rot. So hand in hand, we came to the Forest Service. We said, this is our proposal. It made their job really easy. And we felt that was a big victory.
And was that the wood that had burned? Or
Yeah, so
was it fire?
the outer
Not the
bark burned and the trees died.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to tell if they're really dead. I mean, if you go in there now, you see trees and there's green coming out. So they like to give them a little time. If it is still alive, they'll keep it standing. But yeah, the wood inside is still very valuable.
Good company.
Yeah, no, we felt really good about it. So this is the Don Pedro Dam, and it's almost 600 feet tall. So you can see why rainbow trout couldn't become steelhead, and steelhead couldn't come back.
What part did they raise on that?
Did they raise on this?
Yeah.
They actually didn't raise this, but this is new Don Pedro Dam. There's the old Don Pedro Dam, which is underwater. So the old Don Pedro Dam.
Is this a new dam or just raised?
This was completed in 1971. So
I
it's,
kayaked there before they raised the dam.
okay. Yeah, the old dam is actually submerged. It was 300,000 acre feet.
Oh.
So an acre foot is enough water to cover an acre, or roughly a football field about a foot deep. And the new Don Pedro reservoir is 2 million. So it's 6 or 7 times as big as the old one.
So it's the same reservoir.
Well, it's an expanded reservoir. So the old one probably held back a little bit of water back here, and this one inundates, I would guess, probably 6 times as much land. So an interesting thing is the Hetchy Reservoir, which is the only Sierra reservoir that the SFPUC owns and manages. It's the only one that can actually provide us with drinking water. But the SFPUC went in on Don Pedro, new Don Pedro, with the irrigation districts and paid for almost half of it in order to have a water bank there, which is essentially a place where they can store water, not for their use, but they can borrow off of it. Because the irrigation districts have senior water rights, which means, depending on the time of year, they're guaranteed the first 2,400 cubic feet per second, CFS. And in the spring snowmelt, it goes up to 4,000. So if there's a lot of water flowing down the river, San Francisco can capture, in this case, in 2011, which was a big water year, can capture a lot of that water and fill up Hetchy. But Hetchy is a relatively small reservoir. It's about 360,000 acre feet compared to 2 million for New Don Pedro. So with the water bank, they can continue to let water flow down and fill up this water bank, and then they can borrow off of it in future years. So the drought hit, and there was very little extra water, especially last year. So what they can do is they can capture water at Hetchy, and then they subtract an equal amount from the water bank. And back to your question about how full is Hetchy, this was actually from a couple of weeks ago, and Hetchy was 92% full. So people was like, wow, we had a drought, but it's 92% full. Well, what happened is they were borrowing off of the water bank. And the water bank about 4 years ago was full, 570,000 acre feet. And now it's down to 76,000 and a little bit lower now. So actually, in the last 2 weeks, this number is up to 95%, so it's almost full. But this number is down to about 10%. So the SFPUC has this connection, it's drought insurance, and it really paid off in the last 4 years. So this is the Lagrange Dam, and this goes back to 1893. The Turlock and irrigation districts that own this, they have the first water rights in California. I think it was 1887. And so this is 2 miles downstream of Don Pedro, and it serves as a place to temporarily store water, and then the water comes off on canals on both sides and fills reservoirs for irrigation. So this is the terminus of anadromous fish. Steelhead can still come up to the base of this dam, but that's the limit for them. But we also have these species. Anyone want to guess what these are? Salmon. These are Chinook salmon. Okay, and they also are called king salmon because they are the largest salmon. So this is the largest one found. It was 108 pounds. Normally it could be 30 or 40 pounds. This one was actually in Battle Creek in
Was
California.
that caught in the creek or in the reservoir?
This was caught on Battle Creek, which is a river in California that flows into the Sacramento. Yeah, so this was, normally they don't get this big. Normally they might be 30 or 40 pounds. This one probably lived in the ocean for 5 or 6 years and got really fat. And their life cycle is when it's time for them to reproduce, they have to come back to fresh water. And they stop eating. So they come up, the female will lay eggs in the gravel, in the riffles there where there's kind of moving water with some oxygen, about 5,000 eggs. And the male will fertilize them and then they'll die. And all those nutrients from the ocean then get distributed in the upland areas. So they actually can fertilize forests. Probably a lot of the agricultural land was fertilized by these nutrients from the ocean. And of the 5,000 eggs, on average only about 2 will become reproducing adults. So it's basically replacement value.
Are these edible at this stage?
For other animals,
Or for other
people don't
animals?
really like them. They're pretty tough. I mean, imagine they're coming up, they stop eating, they're losing, their fat is all going into energy, they're grinding over rocks. It's pretty tough meat. But raccoons love them, bears love them, flies love them. I mean, so those nutrients get distributed. Next up. So, and salmon are just incredibly important. They support over 100 other species in the Central Valley, from their egg stage to juvenile to adults. I mean, the Pacific salmon fishery for human beings is pretty major. But we've seen a really serious decline. So this is the lower Tuolumne. It's different than the whitewater section, but it's great for canoeing. It's a beautiful area. We do trips here in the spring, in the fall, when the salmon are spawning. And so you actually get to see them. Last year we didn't see very many. It was a really bad year because of the drought. But in most years we see the salmon. The lower Tuolumne also, we've been working on a river parkway, creating nice parks for people to have access to the river, maybe fall in love with it, help us work to protect it. I mentioned Dos Rios. This is the Dos Rios tract right here, agricultural tract, 1,600 acres, and we purchased that in 2012. It was $22 million. We got state and federal grants, and the San Francisco PUC kicked in a couple million. And so this area is all being restored to wildlife habitat. It's right across from the San Joaquin River National Wildlife Refuge, so it's a really critical area. This area is all being restored. It looks kind of like row crops in a way because of irrigation needs. So, but that's all going to fill in, and then eventually this area will catch up.
Those natural channels?
Those were the natural channels. Yeah, that's where the San Joaquin and so the San Joaquin comes in here, Tuolumne comes in here, and then the San Joaquin flows north towards the delta. So, 60% of the Tuolumne is directly diverted and used for human uses, and of that, that's called developed water. Of that, it's the same breakdown as we have statewide. It's 80% agriculture, 20% to urban uses in the Bay Area. But only 16% is guaranteed for fish. So there are, depending on the time of year and the water year, if it's a wet year or a dry year, each month they have to release a certain amount. And that's only been since 1995, and we were involved in negotiations. But, so 60% is directly diverted. My guess is about 15% of the Tuolumne's natural flow recharges groundwater. And then we pump, for agriculture especially, we pump it. And I think you've all probably seen this graph of the depletion of groundwater. These are satellites that satellite photos that NASA put together. So we're pumping groundwater faster than it's being replenished. So when you think about it, we're really using probably 80% of the Tuolumne. Only 20% on average makes it to the San Joaquin. So one thing that I'd love to circulate is we're involved in some negotiations that I'm going to be talking about in a minute. But it really helps us to show that a lot of people really care about the salmon. So this is a petition if you're interested in signing it. When we meet with elected officials, we bring in a staff.
Going to the CIA?
No, we are involved with NSA and
It's already there.
yeah. Next one.
If
So-
they arrest you, it'll be symbolic. You can use it.
So the last big drought was 1987 to 1992. And then we had a good water year in 1994, but the fish didn't notice it because this would be the natural hydrograph is this blue area here. And you can see we had really good flows in the Tuolumne, but this is what actually was released downstream to the fish. So most of that water was captured in the reservoirs to replenish them because they were so low. So as a result, we've seen a real serious decline in salmon. Before there are any dams on the Tuolumne, there are about 130,000 salmon spawning every year. The dams cut off much of their prime habitat in the upper reaches. All the diversion makes it very difficult. It affects water temperature, affects their ability to hide from predators, oxygen in the water, floodplains. Juvenile salmon love a flooded area where there's a lot more food. They can grow twice as big and have greater survival ability. So last year we had less than 700 salmon spawning. So it's really, they're on the brink at this point. So back in around 2000, people started to get nervous about the fact that the Hetchy line, so Sierra over here, Hetchy, and the line coming in this red, crossed a couple major earthquake faults and also was kind of tinkering around San Andreas. And there's a good chance we're going to have an earthquake, and they found that it could cut off our Sierra water for anywhere from 1 to 2 months. So at that point, the San Francisco PUC embarked on a $4.7 billion seismic upgrade project. So there are 80 of these projects, everything from replacing pipes to dams to water treatment plants. And a lot of these are done at this point, but there are a couple of them they're having a little bit of trouble with. This is the new Irvington Tunnel that brings the water in through the Coast Range, kind of the Mount Hamilton area. They're actually in one area where there's the earthquake fault, it's going to be on rollers. So if there's an earthquake, this line would roll. This has been a challenge, the Calaveras Dam. Probably some of you know this area. It's on the border of Santa Clara and Alameda counties, and a little bit south of Sonoma Wilderness. This is the SFPC's largest Bay Area reservoir. About 10% of their water comes from Alameda Creek and is stored here. And they've had some troubles in that there's a slide plane they weren't expecting, so they're having to do a lot more excavation. And this one is behind schedule and over budget. So at the same time that they were looking at these seismic upgrades, they were also considering what's the future demand going to be. And looking at population growth, Santa Clara County, Alameda County, San Francisco, San Mateo. And so embedded in their plan was a proposal to divert an additional 25 million gallons of water per day from the Tuolumne. So that's enough to fill 1,000 swimming pools every day. It's about an 11% increase. And the Tuolumne is already struggling. So we were very involved in this campaign. We put together a study. We worked with the Pacific Institute in Oakland. They're real experts on water. And we put together this report that our argument was that they were underestimating the potential for water conservation and recycled water, and they were exaggerating demand projections, and weren't looking at things like climate change. And we built a strong case. We had a lot of press events. We got a lot of media attention. We turned out a lot of people to public hearings. And in response to this, the San Francisco PUC, to their credit, approached us with a compromise, which would allow the seismic upgrades to move forward, but they would cap water sales at current levels at about 265 MGD, or million gallons per day, until at least 2018. And really focus on water conservation and recycling and do some ecosystem and climate change studies. And so we agreed to that. And since then, we've all really been working together on promoting water conservation. One thing that has helped out a lot is to pay for this $4.7 billion system upgrade. The price of water has doubled, and it's probably going to go up 50% more from that. So all of a sudden, it's like, wow, we're paying a lot for water. People are paying attention and are really investing in conservation. So there are rebates now for these high-efficiency washing machines. The front loaders use 40% less water. The low-flow shower heads use half as much water. Can't really tell the difference. High-efficiency toilets, there are rebates for that. A lot of times they'll give the shower heads out for free. And a lot more interest in recycled water. Probably some of you have heard about this new facility in San Jose the Advanced Water Purification Center. So this is basically taking wastewater from the wastewater treatment plant and turning it into distilled water. So they do microfiltration, they do reverse osmosis, pushing it through these ultra fine membranes, do ultraviolet light, and they're creating drinking water. It's not going to be used for drinking water in the immediate future, but the plan is that eventually we will probably use it to recharge groundwater, which is one of our primary water sources, drinking water sources. And when the time's right, once people have overcome the yuck factor, that could go directly into our
Did you
pipes.
see the mercury use today?
No, I didn't.
Oh, there was a big article about how that's becoming more acceptable, and there was a survey that said definitely over 50%, like 60% of people were accepting it. And
Yeah,
as you know, there's also the projects going forward here, and there's a lot of things going on with trying to use that advanced treated water for indirect potable reuse by injecting it into our groundwater. So that could be coming in a few years, actually, not.
Yeah, but, when I was on the Palo Alto City Council, I represented the city on the Santa Clara Valley Water Commission. And one day, one of the directors named Sue Sanchez, who was really one of the more conservative directors, he was reporting to us, and he said, "Yeah, we just had a briefing on what they're doing in Orange County, and I'm almost convinced." And I thought, aha, this guy who's very, very cautious, if he's ready for it, it's probably going to happen. So speaking of Orange County, they're doing indirect potable reuse. So indirect potable reuse is you filter it down through the soil, it recharges the groundwater, and then instead of having purple pipes, that second system of pipes, you use the existing pipes. So you have one source of water for all different uses. And what they do is they just fill up these basins, recharge percolation ponds with the recycled water, advanced treated. It percolates down through the salmon soil and recharges the groundwater. And they do 72 million gallons per day in Orange County. I once made a mistake of talking to a more sophisticated audience than I and saying, yeah, this does additional cleaning of the water. And one person said, well, actually, the recycled water is higher quality than the groundwater because there are contaminants in it. But psychologically, people like that extra buffer. So. And another benefit could be enhancing wildlife habitat. So what I'm proposing in the Palo Alto area where I live is we dump 20 million gallons of wastewater into the bay every day. And that's a huge resource. So we do have some sites, especially on the Stanford campus. There's Lake Lagrange, it could be a great recharge basin, and San Francisco Creek, which is a steelhead creek. And that creek, the lower stretch dries up in the summertime because the water's all going into recharging groundwater. So we could use that as a means of recharging the groundwater basin and do it in a way that provides a great run for steelhead and for some of the other species every year. So there's issues about the temperature, but Stanford, they're getting pretty good at extracting heat from water, even if it's just a small change. You can have a pipe go through there, they extract heat for buildings, they cool the water to the right temperature, and we have good conditions for fish and wildlife. So we've been working really closely with the water agencies. We're all good friends now. We have little arguments every so often, but I'd say about 90% of the time we're supporting, and we like to think that they provide the how to conserve water through rebates and education programs, and we provide the why. We connect people to the river. So we host the Silicon Valley Water Conservation Awards with the Water District, Sierra Club, a lot of other groups, to really showcase the great things that are happening. We just wrapped up Paddle to the Sea, which is an annual event. We start on the whitewater section of the Tuolumne, and we end up at the Golden Gate Bridge. So that was last Saturday we finished that. And get people out on the water. We participate in activities like Salmon Aid, the Great Race for Saving Water in Palo Alto. We have a program called That's the Tuolumne My Tap. We reach 5,000 kids every year. One year we reach 10,000. And it's so great working with 4th and 5th grade students because they're they get it, and they're so enthusiastic, they're not jaded yet. And then they go home and they tell their parents, like, hey, we got to get on the ball on this stuff. So we always tell them, it's like, just like kids really launched the recycling movement by educating their parents, water conservation is the next thing. And I run into a lot of friends who, they said, oh yeah, my kid had your program and came home and schooled us on all of it. So the water agencies really responded. They put this cap of 265, and we've been down to 225 average since 2008. So we're well below the cap. There's no stress on their part about meeting the demand. And for us, it's like, hey, that could be more water available to the river. Last year, it was down to about 215 MGD.
What do you mean, is that per year
That's for
or
the,
what?
yeah, that's per day.
person?
So it's 225 million gallons per day for the 2.5 million people in the Bay Area. Yeah.
How would it come out per person?
Well, it depends on where you live. It's there's another chart here that will give you some examples, but it's anywhere from like 35 gallons per person per day in some areas to 300 or 400 per day. So for example, a place like East Palo Alto has a very low per capita. A place like Hillsborough or Portola Valley or Los Altos Hills has higher. A lot of it's for irrigation. Yeah. So BOSCA is this agency, it's the Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation Agency, and they represent the San Francisco PUC's wholesale customers. These are agencies outside of San Francisco. So about a third of the water, the Tuolumne water that comes into the Bay Area is used in San Francisco. 2/3 is used in San Mateo, Santa Clara, and Alameda counties. And those agencies are represented by BOSCA. And they updated their demand projections, and lo and behold, we were right. So in 2008, they were expecting they were going to need so much water. This new study, they found they're only going to need 168 million gallons per day by 2040. Before they were saying 194. So it was a 20% reduction. So except in times of extended drought, we're in pretty good shape. So this is, obviously most of our water comes from the Sierra. You can see the red is historical mean. The blue is what we've seen this last year. And January was dismal. I mean, normally January would be the biggest water year. And I think it was like on the last day or two of January that we had a little bit of rain. So otherwise, we were looking at zero precipitation. And this is on top of the fact that we had 3 other years of drought beforehand. So not looking very good.
Where was that measured?
Up in the Sierra, kind of in the Hetchy area, flowing into Hetchy. So the snowpack, you might have heard back in April, it was about 5% of the average. So it was really, really low. We depend on the snowpack. It's a second reservoir. It releases that water, into the early summer, sometimes even the late summer. So it's continuously filling Hetchy. And sometimes in a really good water year, if there's a lot of snow, by August we're still almost full at Hetchy. But this year we had very little snow. We had a couple little blips in April and May, but we're essentially
And
done.
this reflects pretty much the rest of the Sierra.
Yeah, yeah.
This is just the Tuolumne water.
This is just the Tuolumne, and the Tuolumne is in a little bit better shape because it's a higher elevation than other areas. So other areas probably were even worse off.
So the curves would be about the same.
Yeah, yeah. So this is really good news in that the red line is the average, and our goal was to conserve 10%. And that's what that line represents. And then starting in June, that's when the governor's mandate kicked in of 25%. So that's why the goal dropped precipitously, and that's what the goal is. And the green is what we're using. And we were doing great at first, but the summer months are when we use a lot of water for irrigation, and people have really been cutting back. So we're down to 188 million gallons per day, which is really unheard of. I mean, it's remarkable. And actually, as of yesterday, it was down to 181, so it's even dropped a little bit since then. So, where we normally would be up, pushing on 250, we're much lower. So we're doing a good job in the area. You asked about per capita water use. These cities and agencies in the green are all in the San Francisco PUC territory. So this is the for all of the Bay Area. Martinez, I don't know how they are at 32, they're doing something amazing there. But most of them are in the SFPUC territory, so we really are making some good progress. I don't know if you see your own agency there. If you are, good for you. San Jose is probably not as low, and most of San Jose's water comes from the Santa Clara Valley Water District. So in 2012, the San Francisco PUC, they commissioned a study on how climate change might affect runoff. And in one scenario, the kind of more drastic scenario was almost 30% less water. Which I tend to, I mean, all these other reports are very, they don't stick their necks out, and then, you know, a few years later we realize it's like, wow, that was too conservative. So I think this really could be the situation we're facing in the future. More rainfall, less snow, so the precipitation comes earlier in the season, and snowpack isn't lasting through the summer or even into the early summer. Here's the Mount Lyell Glacier that we saw at the beginning. The geologist at Yosemite believes it's probably going to be gone in 5 to 10 years. And actually, officially, it's not a glacier anymore because a glacier has to have enough mass that's actually moving, and this is not. So it's a small amount of the water that feeds the reservoir. You know, it's a tenth of 1%. But it does produce water for the Lyell Fork throughout the summer. So there's always water in that section. When this is gone, that'll be dried up. So that was 2009 here, and then 2014, big change. So a couple opportunities. The way we see it is we have to do two things. We have to conserve water and find other sources like recycled water so that more water can be available for the river, and then we need policies in place to make sure it's actually flowing down the river at the right time of year for fish and wildlife. The Don Pedro Dam, it got its license in 1966. And that's through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And now, 50 years later, they have to renew their license. So this has been a 5-year process that started in 2011. We're interveners, so we're engaged. There are other nonprofits, permitting agencies like National Marine Fisheries Service, Fish and Wildlife, Department of Water, or State Water Resources Control Board. And everyone acknowledges that the lower Tuolumne is really in bad shape and is going to need more water, and there's going to be a big debate about how much is necessary. But the SFPUC, because of their relationship with the water bank and all, they have an agreement that they would provide a little more than half of an increased release. So that's another reason why this conservation is really good, so that we have that water available. A lot of times they'll pay the irrigation.
You can't increase the capacity there, that's as high as it can go.
Well, if you did raise the dam, you would inundate some of the wild scenic stretch of the river, so that would be a policy decision. There has been an attempt on the Merced River to raise Acterra Dam, and that would inundate some wild scenic rivers, so it's very controversial. So another thing is the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. So the State Water Resources Control Board is tasked with the co-equal goals of protecting water supply and protecting the Bay Delta ecosystem, which is collapsing. And what they're looking at is requiring a certain amount of unimpaired flow. So that's flow that would come down the rivers if there was no diversions and no dams. So, you know, a percentage of what naturally would come down. And for the phase 1 of this, they're looking at Stanislaus, the Tuolumne, and Merced. And it could be anywhere from 20 to 60%. So right now on the stand, it's probably about 35%. It's higher because there's the federal government's involved with the dam there, and they have more control. And the Tuolumne and Merced is only about 20%. So what they proposed in 2013 was 35% of unimpaired flow, so about a third, which when you think about it, it's like, still not very much, a third of what the fish naturally would see. But there's a big uproar. The irrigation districts, you know, said that's going to destroy our economy. They, by the way, the farmers pay $10 an acre foot, and we pay $1,300 an acre foot. So there's not a lot of incentive through the pricing structure to use it efficiently. So we're really involved in that, and actually a new revised plan, they went back to the drawing board because they realized this is very complicated and they wanted to have a really strong case. So we think the revised plan is going to be released as early as September. It's been stalled a few times. So what we're going to do is we're going to be encouraging a lot of people to send comment letters. They could be, very technical, or they could just be, hey, I really care about rivers and having salmon in California. There will be public hearings in Sacramento. It's really important for us to get people to come to those. What we're doing right now is we've been handwriting little cards and letters and mailing a couple each day to the water board, so that they realize it's like, wow, something's going on out there. People are paying attention, because the staff for the water board are coming to the 5 board members. So Felicia Marcus, you might have heard her name, she's the president of the board. And they're saying, here's what we're thinking, and they're getting feedback from the board. And if the board says, we really do need to have maybe closer to 40%, then that's what the plan might say. And then it's easier for us to start at 40% than 35 or 30. So anyone who signs the salmon petition, I'll try to send you out an email in the next couple of days and just let you know if you're willing to write a letter. It really helps out. 5 minutes is fine. A lot of the cards are kind of those nice free cards you get from the groups you respond to, but just something a little different than what they normally see. So, I kind of like to put this in perspective. If all the water on the Earth were in one sphere, that's how big it would be. And 97% of that is salt water. And only 1% of it is accessible water to us. 2% is locked up in ice. So water is this precious resource. They're not creating any more of it. More and more of it's getting contaminated. And it's going to be one of those issues that's going to be a real breaking point for our species and many others. So I like to just end with this quote from Chief Seattle, that man did not weave the web of life, he's merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. And with the kids, we'd like to end with this and kind of get, what does this mean to you? And they really get it. They'll say, well, if you hurt the environment, we depend on it, so it hurts us. Sometimes they'll say karma. It's all about karma. And then we'll ask, well, what percentage of our bodies is water? So 70%. And 85% of our water comes from the Tuolumne, so more than half of your body is Tuolumne River water. You're carrying it with you everywhere you go. Go tell your parents that. Yeah. So it really is, we're trying to connect people to the resource, seeing how special it is, and the need to balance the different interests. We can do it. There's a lot of room for efficiency. In agriculture, there's the kinds of crops that we grow, drip irrigation. We could probably do a lot more to recharge the groundwater in very wet water years, which will help out, because that's what they've been relying on a lot during the drought. In the Bay Area, we've made so much progress, and just the plumbing codes alone are saving so much water. You putting in a new toilet, it's got to be at a certain level. When I was a kid, it was 5 to 7 gallons per flush. Now it's 1 gallon.
3 feet of water for a crop of hay. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, like alfalfa, it's very water intensive.
Agriculture. We haven't mentioned agriculture consumption.
Yeah, so agriculture it's the big one, and growing alfalfa, then you feed it to cattle, and there are figures that that a pound of beef can take 2,500 gallons of water. 1 almond can take 1 gallon of water. So what we choose to grow in California. Rice doesn't make a lot of sense, although a lot of bird and wetland advocates say, hey, those rice paddies are making up for some of the natural wetlands that have been destroyed. So there are kind of different viewpoints on that.
And what we choose to eat ourselves.
And what we choose to eat, yeah. It makes a big difference. Eating more of a plant-based diet stretches water resources. And where the food is used, our water is a public trust resource. It really belongs to all of us. An agency might own the infrastructure that can capture it, transport it, but really the water belongs to all of us. And if it's growing food for us, that kind of makes sense. But when they're exporting it, especially almonds and other nuts, to other countries, so they're using subsidized water to make a profit, and it's not coming back to the people of California. I think those issues are going to be, there's there's going to be a spotlight on those issues.
Speaking of
Why don't we all,
I'm sorry, just that, that applies to new construction, but I think a big issue is all the existing construction that is out there, which is a majority of the use, right?
Yeah.
And how to retrofit that, and I know the rebates have helped, but I think overall, and especially in like landscaping now, they have these landscape efficient ordinances, and they're going to make them even more strict. They're working on it right now. But that's for new construction, so you're looking at like the majority of the people don't.
Yeah, I mean, they can get rebates for irrigation efficient technologies,
you can get
weather-based.
rebates, but still, it's it's hard to convert that much existing stock.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think the indirect and direct potable reuse is so important, because if you're building a new building, you could put in a second set of pipes, pretty easy to do, but a building that's already there, difficult to dual pipe it. So if we're using one water supply that can go through all the pipes, anyone can take advantage of it. And we think about all of our water is recycled, just whether Mother Nature does it or we do it. And Mother Nature does a great job. Maybe we should acknowledge that ecosystem service, and instead of making the environment the enemy, realize that, hey, this is our infrastructure.
I mean, the Sierra Club is pretty much in support of that too, but we're not in support of CEQA exemptions.
Yeah. Yeah, so the point there is
Which is
that,
what's happening right now.
yeah, there's some talk about trying to get exemptions from going through the California Environmental Quality Act for recycled water projects to move them along faster. And I think most environmentalists think, well, no, that's, once you start circumventing CEQA, you're kind of opening up a can of worms. And there's information, and it'll help convince people that this is safe. You've done the studies, and this is a good product.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
how about emigrating back east now?
Where the water is?
Where the water is.
I was thinking Maine, Maine's gonna become popular.
My wife is from Michigan, so that's our fallback plan.
Yeah, but then you gotta live there.
Did your organization support the initiative to remove the Hetchy Dam?
We didn't. We don't have a position on Restore Hetchy. Our board felt like once you get into that, then that becomes everything. And I mean, I think there's not much chance it's going to happen. We're doing a lot of interesting work. We're working with low-income communities in Modesto, predominantly Latino, introducing the river. We have education programs throughout the watershed. We're doing fire recovery. We're involved in procedures that will get more water in the river. I mean, things that we're gonna have results. And Restore Hetchy, I mean, it's like, I think most people would agree that that dam probably didn't belong there in the first place. But it's there. It's not blocking inhabitants' fish. They probably never made it up that high. There's a waterfall downstream. It's probably the terminus. Maybe some steelhead got close to it. And you'd be replacing a water supply that doesn't require filtration, so it's a lower carbon footprint. Doesn't require any pumping. It's gravity fed all the way to the area, and it's generating hydroelectricity. And you'd have to start filtering water and pumping it, so the greenhouse gas impact actually favors keeping the dam there. So we don't have a position on it, but I can't really see that.
Even the Sierra Club didn't take a position the last time it came up on the ballot.
Yeah.
Which is really was difficult because, as you know, we were founded by John Muir,
Yeah.
who basically started all this because of Hetchy. So that's like super high tension for the Sierra Club, but we felt the same way. There's just so many other things to spend our energy on that are more feasible and more, more productive.
Yeah. So if you want to get more involved in Sierra Club water issues, talk to Katya.
Get love and Prieta.
Governor Brown had one about the water tunnels. They wanted to get him thoughts on how.
Yeah, so the first Jerry Brown administration, they had the Peripheral Canal, which was referended and defeated. And this time around it's the Peripheral Tunnels, the twin tunnels. And the idea is you'd have a couple of very large tunnels, I think maybe 35 miles long, going from the Sacramento River underneath the delta to the southern delta where the pumps are. And the pumps that are active right now are very damaging to fish in that they suck in juvenile salmon and smelt. They actually reverse the flow of the river. And fish, juvenile fish, when they're getting flushed out into the ocean, they point upstream and they depend on the current to take them down. So if they hit a reservoir, they don't know where to go, or if the water's really slow, if it's not flow, or if these pumps are sucking the water the wrong direction, that's the direction they're going to go. And then these invasive predators like bass wait there just to pick them off. So the idea, the good part of the idea is that if we could take this water from the Sacramento and bring it through tunnels versus through the natural infrastructure to where it might go, which would be the southern San Joaquin Valley or Los Angeles, Southern California, that you might not have as much fish entrainment and those kinds of problems. But I think the worry is that once you have these big tunnels, they're going to take a lot more water out of the Sacramento. And infrastructure is one way to control how much water. Is like if you have a certain size pipe, they're not going to take any more than that. You know, big pipes for the maximum, for when they really need a lot of water in the summertime. You know, what's going to prevent them from using those tunnels all the time to fill reservoirs, and that's a political decision, and things can change. So it's really expensive. There's questions about, you know, who would pay for them, the beneficiaries of it, or would we all pay for it? Santa Clara Valley, those of you who are on Santa Clara Valley Water District water would pay a lot of money for very limited benefit. So I think, you know, they're going to be controversial. I don't think they're moving very quickly right now on that.
But it's also just the damage that the construction of these things will do to very sensitive habitats. We don't have a position that I know of on the latest, which they released a modified environmental document for review, I believe, or is it just a notice of preparation?
I'm not sure where it is, but they dropped the habitat restoration component of it, which was
right. It was going to be actually the Bay Delta Conservation Plan now. I mean, they're still calling it BDCP, but I don't know that there's any conservation plan.
Yeah. It's like the one little handout for environmental groups.
Regular EIR that will have to mitigate everything, which is going to make it really hard for them, I think. There's going to be a lot of questions about that. But yeah, I know that even at our water district, Santa Clara Valley Water District, the board of directors, current board of directors has a lot of questions and concerns about cost versus benefit.
Yeah.
I believe somewhere that actually the governor, between things, a bond measure that passed and some other funding resources, that he actually could make a decision. He doesn't need a legislative action or a public referendum.
You might need money though.
Well,
Well, I think the water bond is carefully designed not to be used for these.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, everything's being carefully designed, also the CEQA exemptions that they've putting forward for recycled water are carefully designed to not allow the DCP to go through without CEQA. So I think that actually, thank God, our legislature is trying to protect us. Yeah, and trying to protect our environment.
Jerry Brown's
a little
interesting,
bit,
isn't he?
trying to
A lot of great stuff.
protect CEQA, protect environmental review,
Yeah.
which doesn't protect very much, actually, but, like you said, it's a process that makes people feel good that they participated, and they know at least what the impacts are gonna be.
You recommend praying?
If praying helps you out, yes.
Praying for what?
Praying to give yourself strength to get engaged is even better.
Well, speak to the Pope.
Yeah, he's pretty fantastic. Yes.
So in referencing to what you just brought up about exporting food that is produced with water, what is being actually done?
Not much, but people are talking about it. I mean,
Well,
you
that's
see,
the first
you see
step.
articles about it. Yeah, I think you know, water policy, they haven't really touched it. It's like the third rail. It's interesting because
Because it's huge amounts.
agriculture provides about 2 to 3% of our economy in California. So it's pretty small, but it's a pretty important one because you can't eat anything besides food. So I think we all need to look at it as, you know, together. And like a lot of times when we say, well, 80% of our developed water goes to agriculture and 20% for urban uses, but we eat a lot of food. So if you really calculated that, it's like, what's our water footprint? It's not that much different than a farmer's water footprint as far as what we're consuming. But you know, like last year we had the groundwater, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which was, you know, a huge step forward. I mean, it's small in some ways and it's going to take a long time, but it's like for the first time we're starting to manage groundwater. And that's a big deal. And you know, I think that people are realizing, I mean, that's one good thing about the drought is that there's more and more people in California, less water, climate change is really an unknown, and we have to look at policy. So more legislators are standing up and coming up with really good ideas. Fran Padley's been fantastic, and others. So I think we'll start moving in that direction. But I'll tell you, they don't want to give up these senior water rights that enable them to, you know, basically give water away. I mean, land in Stanislaus County, farmland is so much more valuable than other farmland because they have this really reliable water supply. And even when others are struggling in the drought, they're still doing much better.
Well, the first time I actually heard about it was with someone who does a lot of work with China. And he said, you know, when we really think about it, we're exporting all this water to China. Because they also have a big water problem. So he totally saw the political side.
Yeah.
He said,
So I think that's a winner. I mean, I think, you know what? I was talking to a friend of mine who's the director of Friends of the River about the voter turnout in California was pretty low the last election. I mean, Jerry Brown was a shoo-in, and people just didn't really vote. So the threshold for qualifying a citizen initiative, which is
really
a certain percentage, is low. And, you know, could we do a citizen initiative? And what would it be? And what I was thinking is like, well, let's charge 1 cent per 1,000 gallons. So if you are taking public trust water, you put a penny per 1,000 gallons into the state coffer for water efficiency, for solving these problems. And the average voter is like a penny per 1,000 gallons. You know, I go and buy a jug of a gallon of water, it's $2. This is a deal. But it would make a big difference because an acre foot that farmers are paying $10 for in this area is 326,000 gallons. So that would be 326
$3,260, yeah.
or $326. Yeah. So that makes a big difference, and you know, a lot of that money could go back to them to put in the infrastructure to make it more efficient. So maybe there's even a way that they're paying more per acre foot, but they're doubling their yield through drip irrigation, and they're making more money. So that they're paying more per acre foot, but they're paying less per dollar earned than they are now. I think there are some creative things that can happen.
Do you think there'll be any action about these ancient water rights that go back to 1850s?
Well, you know what they're talking about right now is, so there's 1914 was a critical year, and that if your water rights predate 1914, they're kind of seen as, you know, untouchable almost. So when they have curtailments, like during the drought, they're cutting back and they're saying, okay, those of you with post-1914 water rights, you have to cut back this much. But what we're talking about right now is also curtailing water rights between 1903 and 1914. So they're starting to kind of move into that. It's not the most senior water rights, but it's, you know, pre-1914 water rights. And they can do that.
Why not?
It will depend on how desperate we get.
Well,
Another year of drought, I think we're going to see a lot of change.
On that subject, what is so sacred about the pre-1914 water rights?
You know, I don't know, but it was some kind of legislation that came into being at that point. And so I think some were grandfathered in, and then anyone post then had to adhere to the new legislation. I don't remember what it was. Yeah, I mean, it was all, yeah. And a citizen initiative trumps anything else. Like when the people actually vote on something, it's kind of locked in until the people vote on it again. So, I think people are ready.
Unless it's ruled unconstitutional.
Right. Okay, well, thank you all for coming out. And,
Peter. So, thank you all for coming. One of the things that I mentioned, I'll mention again, if you're interested in the fundraiser for the state agency on the Sierra program, make sure your name's on the list, and we'll give you the details. There's a draft there, but all we know is for sure it's my house last Sunday in July. Thank you all.
We also have some free butternut squash sprouts if you are interested. Please take them.
And put a few handouts on that table there if anyone's interested about Tuolumne River Trust.
And the Guadalupe group is run by volunteers, so your donations are appreciated.
Okay.
Thanks. There are 9 of us. We're not a big group, but we're focused.
One question, you showed the water levels, current capacity.